Well, in the last segment, I shared with you the role and challenges of leadership across the life cycle. Now we're going to turn our attention to the common pain points, classic missteps across the life cycle. Common pain points of each phase tend to shed light on the tensions or the misalignments within that phase that often lead to missteps, time delays of getting to the next phase. In some cases, the pain points actually contribute to the overall failure of the business. So keep in mind that every business is different. Whether you're part of a large company or a startup company will determine your unique situation. But as a general rule, I've found that over the years, most of these pain points and missteps are still very relevant, regardless of the type of business you're in. Okay? In the early market phase, there's often three key pain points that come into focus. First, there's the misalignment between the value proposition that gets communicated to the early adopters and the investors and the actual functionality of that technology or that product. Okay? They're pushing, here the organization really is pushing the bleeding edge of technology often. And while the vision and intention is clear, the practical reality of where the technology is just doesn't yet achieve that value proposition. And that sometimes determines whether that product will continue to make it in the marketplace or, basically die a slow death. And I've seen that happen a number of times as well. The second is the mismatch of leadership management skill set and the style of entrepreneurial and innovative leadership in this phase. Okay, and I mentioned that in the last segment. This is particularly true in existing companies where the mature operational leaders are often rewarded with an exciting new opportunity to lead this new technology or product organization. Again, if they're pretty savvy and aware that they're not the right kind of person, they'll set their organization more up as an ambidextrous organization and protect and fund somebody else to actually lead that effort, okay? But often that doesn't occur, okay? The third mismatch is really about uncertainty in the marketplace, okay? And here the approach is like, if we build it, they'll come, yet there doesn't seem to be a compelling need or a pull by the market for the technology at this time. Sometimes the product or technology is just way ahead of its time, and it's not yet addressing that particular problem or that need that might be of interest by those early adopters, the angel investors, etc. Okay. One of the major missteps often in the early market phase also is that the organization tries to do everything itself rather than to find partners that can contribute and help get to that proof point faster. Sometimes this is purely a kind of a financial constraint and challenge. There just isn't the money available to bring in the partner. But sometimes it's just you get consumed with thinking about what you need to do to go forward. Okay, so that's the early market phase. Let's talk about the bowling alley phase. As the organization now enters bowling alley, inadequate resources are often the major pain point. Okay, sometimes resources are constrained by, again, investment dollars or the ability to track the right skilled people, but it often results in time delays, missed milestones, and commitments. Another pain point that you see here, particularly for the established companies, is that they leverage the existing or the mature processes in ways that don't match the need for speed, flexibility, or how things get done. I was mentioning earlier that big flywheel that goes around often, and again, organizations get forced to use those processes that have been honed in and tuned up over the years, and that just doesn't work, okay? And then lastly, sometimes the organization is just immature in its development and lacks the ability to coordinate effectively so that the right hand knows what the left hand is doing and vice versa. It's like everybody is kind of hunkered down, focused on what they're doing, and the infrastructure really isn't in place for that effective coordination which just causes more delays, problems, and challenges going along. Okay? So while there are a number of missteps that can happen in the bowling alley phase, the two greatest ones in my experience is the failure to get the product out into the market as a rapid prototype or demo so that the early adapters, the innovators, the investors can get excited, can create that buzz around that product and get going. Or impatience on the leadership side to actually capture the interest of a number of market segments so that the herd will begin to move. Sometimes there's kind of pressure here from the investors for a quick return on investment. But you really got to get that market going so that the herd will start to really move if you really want to have a successful tornado phase. So let's turn our attention then to the tornado phase. As the organization enters a tornadoes phase and everyone reaches for their seatbelts, the amount of detail, task, complexity increases tremendously, okay? And often one of the greatest pain points is all that complexity bottlenecking at either the CEO, the general manager, the P&L owner. It's really at their level that it does. Here, that entrepreneurial leadership, the founder that has brought the technology or the product to market is now way over their heads often. And a more mature, experienced operational leader is required to hold both the big picture as well as all the details of that and that complexity. So leadership becomes a critical one. The second really big pain point is the ability to scale and adapt or create the processes and systems to enable the scaling. Okay, often the ad hoc or informal processes of the system that have gotten you to this point will just not support scaling. So a major effort to focus on discipline and well-defined processes, systems, channels, partners are required for growth. And that leads to two major missteps, okay? First, leadership at this point has to create a burning platform for change. It must signal the organization that what got us here to this point is not sufficient to take us into the tornado phase. And all hands are now required on deck to be building a sustainable organization with the right skills, the right capabilities to weather this tornado, okay? This also requires that the organization doesn't try to do it all by itself. You know, if you want fast scaling, you have to look to partners to help with that heavy lifting to deliver on the commitments to capture and grow the market. And again, often a lot of those partners come on the channel side or the supply chain side to grow the market, to grow the ramping, to get the product out fast and quickly to the business. Okay? Now let's shift our attention to Main Street and talk a little bit about there. So by the time the organization gets to Main Street, and assuming you've become that 900-pound gorilla, not everybody does, but assuming that you are the market leader, the challenges and pain points also increase. Okay? Competitors now are all coming after your market share. They're finding creative ways to make your product either cheaper or easier in some ways, or some alternative to it. If you look at the inkjet business, you know, on the ink side, this is where on Main Street there was other people who came in to actually find creative ways that you could do ink cheaper by refilling your ink containers, etc. So there's a whole bunch of different ways that competitors will find ways to disrupt you or to challenge you in some ways. Also, as the margins get tighter, greater efficiencies need to be found, and often there is a lot of activity traps around the complex processes that you've created to get you through that tornado phase. You know, because at that point, you know, dollars really didn't matter. You were making so much money, you could just throw money at these problems and challenges, and now they're going to have to be reinvented, tuned for greater efficiency, okay? So as consumers demand more, then also customer intimacy becomes paramount in this phase. Okay, the current functional organization structure, often needed in that tornado phase to just focus and get things done, now has to shift more to what we call a front-back structure, where the front end is customer-facing, and they can pay clear attention to the customer needs and the satisfaction and all the intimacy of that relationship that's important. And then the back end can focus much more on those greater efficiencies to take out costs, to make things easier for the customers, but also for the organization to function, to wring out, again, the costs out of the system and to make it very efficient. Okay? So as this shift happens, keep in mind that the cumulative effect of having lived through this tornado, which in many ways was overwhelming. It might be fun as the revenue dollars flowed in and the spending wasn't an issue, but now the dollars are tight and the task is a bit overwhelming. So burnout also becomes a great challenge, and keeping employees is a major risk for the business because they've just experienced tremendous success. They're often, looking for something new for themselves, maybe just a change. So you really got to focus on to the care and the feeding of the employees, and also finding ways to let them kind of rejuvenate in many ways. So on top of all of this, then the organizational risk, the opportunity for not creating that new, exciting S-curve. Okay, where's the new innovation or the product that's going to take this business onto that next S-curve? So Main Street takes the organization to a whole new level of complexity and challenge, and in many ways, all the fun and the excitement of the early days are long gone. For those who've been with the company and the organization throughout most of this journey, a major misstep is to indulge in that nostalgia, for the simpler, more exciting and fun times, instead of focusing on these hard challenges required to be successful on Main Street. And then another major misstep is the failure of leadership to, again, shift the organizational model to enable greater customer intimacy on the front end while focusing on that efficiency on the back end. The functional organizations often experience a loss of power and influence as they hold on to that centralized processes and control. They're going to now have to shift that and move that to the edges of the organization and closer to the consumers. So it's a major organizational shift, both for the leaders of these various parts of the organization, as well for the organization as a whole. And lastly, as the organization moves closer to that end of life, it must begin to operate with greater ambidexterity, okay? Both continue to deliver on the consistent margins of a cash cow business that it's become, while reinventing itself and creating its future for someone or before someone else actually beats them to it and gets to that next S-curve before them. So it's a very challenging time for businesses. So with that, this really concludes the series of understanding the focus and challenges for technology life cycles. I hope you found this both interesting and valuable. Again, this is a great tool to use as a diagnostic in your organization. And if you have further interest, I'd be happy to share more with you at any time. Please feel free to contact me through the Pyrus group. And I thank you for your time and your patience to be here today. Thanks.